Go to UFC 251. Let's talk about this fight card. We obviously mentioned different pieces of the fight card last week, uh, but let's talk about sort of everything that led up and transpired to Jorge Masvidal taking the place of Gilbert Burns this week.
Yeah, when we touched on it last week, I'm pretty sure, yeah, we had Gilbert Burns
Yeah.
slated in this spot.
Yes, we did.
So a little bit of a change, but I'm a little bit worried about this main event now. Obviously, Jorge Masvidal is nowhere near the wrestler that Gilbert Burns is, and I think that may hinder him in this fight. Not that Jorge, can't hang. I think obviously he's shown that with fights like Ben Askren that he can obviously knock out a really good wrestler in a matter of seconds. So, I think if he catches a few clips early on, and he really has to keep this fight on his feet. I think once this goes to the ground, I think Usman really dominates. So as long as this fight stays upright, I think Jorge has a pretty good shot. Also, I think you get a lot more personality with Jorge, which will make this main event a little bit more exciting. Obviously, the BMF title belt holder.
Yeah! Get the Rock in here. Let's go.
So there's a little bit more personality, a little bit more fun to it now. But I'm a little bit more worried as far as actual quality of the fight now.
In this particular, very unique situation, of course, Jorge was dealing with some contract negotiation issues. They kind of had to iron it out with Gilbert Burns going down with COVID, unfortunately, so hope he heals really fast. But what is the challenge? And I'm sure this is even more unique than ever in having a short, a short time span to this fight, a short notice, in the sense that you have to get tested and you have to be quarantined for, 36 hours in Vegas and then 48 in Abu Dhabi, and the uniqueness of the fact that it's in Fight Island and this really strange situation. How does Jorge and his team handle that? Do you think it's a much more difficult proposition than a normal short notice fight?
Yeah, so having a short camp is always, like you said, difficult for a lot of these fighters, just because they game plan and train around certain, takedown defenses and stuff like that. But I think you hit the nail on the head when you said adding all these other elements as far as COVID testing and it being at Fight Island and all this other stuff.
And quarantining a bunch.
Really, really does, hinder, maybe hinder, the ability for a guy to get ready for this type of fight. Especially when you're in a championship fight. It's one thing, and that's the other thing I want to touch on, is the fight styles of these guys are a little bit different, so I think it makes it even harder on a small camp. It's easier when it's two guys that want to stand up and fight. You know what I mean? Two guys that slug it out. Like if this was Nate and Jorge 2.0, it would be a lot easier because those guys both have more than a willingness to just stand up and slug it out. But like I said, on a short camp, when they're training for certain takedown defenses and stuff like that, especially against a guy like Kamaru Usman, who's world-class wrestler, it really does affect the outcome, and it will affect the outcome of this fight.
Mm-hmm. And then we obviously spoke about the card at length last time we were on, but I did want to speak on Fight Island and what your thoughts have been, obviously seeing, all the precautions that are in place and seeing, the beautiful views outside these guys' hotel rooms, not only from media, but the fighters themselves and everything, and that whole process of this whole week in Fight Island. What has been your reaction to that? Obviously, we're not done with the first week of Fight Island, but we're in Thursday now, and they start traveling on, I think, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. What has been your reaction to sort of how Fight Island has operated?
To be honest, I think it went about just as smoothly as it could. I think the UFC did a pretty good job of, making sure safety precautions and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, it's something that us as fans have kind of wanted for a while to see this, this type of setting and this type of scenery. Like I said, that's also a lot more difficult for the UFC to kind of navigate that type of terrain. So I think it went about just as well, and hopefully it continues up to the fight, that it continues to go just about as smoothly as it's gone, because I think it's it's been about as seamless as a transition as you can get from where they were to bringing it to this type of setting and event.
And I think it's really interesting to hear Dana talk about how all these precautions make it nearly impossible for these guys to test positive, and seeing all the precautions from media members. But I mean, I think more than likely, from what I've heard, we're not going to get any outdoor fights, which is unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
But at least they get to train out there and do. I'm pretty sure they're going to do some weigh-ins and stuff like that
Yeah, you'll
out
get
there.
some kind of behind the scenes stuff that
Yeah.
bring a little more intrigue. But
I think, yeah, but I think it was really interesting. Like, all right, we wanted this place because we want to get these international fighters in here, and it's I don't know. There's something about this that just feels really, really right, other than other sports, as we'll get to with the MLS and all that, where this just feels like it's going to work really well. And obviously, there's going to be some mishaps, and people are going to test positive and all this stuff. Yeah, I'm sure that might happen at some point, but more than likely, this is something that the UFC is going to look at and say, you know what, we did this for a month, it worked great. After the pandemic is over, I think we want to go back here as well.
yeah,
And keep
definitely. I
doing
think
this.
I think you bring up a really good point because I think it was even yesterday. Adam Silver said, there's reason to believe that this might not be a seamless transition for the NBA. And he can see some flaws in their system and their testing and stuff. So it's interesting also to hear, Dana, like you just said, if I heard you correctly, say that, it makes it really hard for these guys to test positive with all the precautions and stuff that they're taking. So I think UFC has done a really good job, and I think it's definitely something that, maybe other sports or, definitely UFC moving forward can kind of use it as, kind of
Yeah.
a layout. You know what I
Right.
mean? I don't know how to word it, but
Yeah. The precautions are so strict that, yeah, I think it is pretty difficult to test positive. I think more than likely one person probably is going to, but even if that's the case, the precautions are going to be so good that I don't think anyone else is going to have it.
yeah, and that's obviously something I hope that the NBA and other leagues take into account. I don't know if you've been watching, but the basketball tournament TBT has been on
Yeah.
ESPN. It seems like that's been going really well. So I think there's something to be said, like Dana's saying, for the precautions that they're taking and stuff. It is really hard, for things to kind of shut down. So fingers crossed, like
Definitely.
football,
100%.
baseball, everything we can keep this rolling.
Yeah, I love what the UFC has been doing with this. I do. I think even with the whole thing in Jacksonville and in Vegas, it's gone as smoothly as any sports league in the world.
Definitely.